either in your design document or in comments in your code if you disagree. So what about this, the keyboard? So some people don't really like the built-in keyboard. Why? Yeah.
All the keys are still there even if you guessed a letter.
Yeah, there's all the keys that are still there. Even if you guess the letter, all the numbers are there, all the punctuation's there, the space is there, the return key is there. There's just way more than the 26 buttons you actually need. Now, on the upside, what's an upside of actually using the built-in keyboard? You don't have to make a keyboard, right? It's a wheel you don't have to reinvent. Downside, though, is that same reason. And unfortunately, you can't override, at least via any public API, the colorings of the keyboard of individual letters. So you can't sort of do what would be ideal, probably, which is disable some of the buttons or change them aesthetically and hide other numbers and whatnot. You can install a different keyboard altogether. You can have all numbers. You can have email address-centric keyboards and whatnot. But you don't have fine-grained control via the SDK. So what's an alternative to using the built-in? What's that? Make your own. All right, so that's not that hard, right? You just need, it's a little tedious, but you need 26 buttons probably, or 26 something so that you can detect where the user is actually pressing. So if you have 26 buttons, you probably need 26 IB outlets so that you can talk to each individual button so you know what letter was pressed. So you could have 26 properties, each of which is IB outlet, but here you're starting to cross that line of reasonable design, right? 26 properties is sort of CS 101 style, let me just have 26 variables. What would we do once we had 26 variables? Collapse them into an array. So now maybe you have an NS array that's a property, but the array can't be an IB outlet. You can't just drag multiple things into an array. Just Xcode won't let you do that. But remember from our no-nib example in class a week or two ago, you can programmatically create the effect of those blue lines by adding targets. You can configure things with code to listen for messages. So that might be one approach. Now, it's a good way, frankly, of dividing work. If you really hate the keyboard, have your partner make a new keyboard while you focus on the models or something. So it's one way. All right, so that's one approach. There's no right answers here. So what are some of the other design decisions? Well, when it comes to actually implementing good gameplay, so non-evil hangman, what needs to happen in verbal pseudocode when the game starts up? Yeah. Okay, gameplay picks a word. You store that in some local or some instance variable or some property, probably, in your good gameplay object.
And then as the user guesses, it displays the letters or whatnot, or penalizes you with taking a guess.
OK, good. So as the user touches numbers on the key or UI buttons that you've manually constructed, you need to start revealing letters or penalizing the user if they've guessed a letter that's not actually there. So good gameplay is actually relatively easy to implement. And I would probably recommend starting with good gameplay. But we have to bear in mind that you also need evil gameplay. So you need to somehow, ideally, standardize the interface to these good gameplay and these evil gameplay objects. And the spec specifically has you implement a gameplay delegate protocol. So those of you who are quite comfortable with object-oriented programming probably realize you can actually have a parent class and then have both evil and good descend from it. So you could standardize the interface that way. And that's fine. We do prescribe intentionally a protocol just because there's really that's kind of been an overused abuse of hierarchy, where there's not really a conceptual hierarchy here. It's just the way in Java, for instance, to actually share functionality. But in Objective-C, you can have these protocols. So if I want to have in my main view controller a pointer to the brains of this application, namely a good gameplay delegate, how can we go about declaring this property? In main view controller, I might have at property, something in parentheses. Then I might have, I kind of want either a good game, let's see, what do we call it? A good gameplay pointer, good, or I could do this. Don't necessarily write this down because this isn't necessarily the best way. Evil gameplay. So I could do this, right? I could have two pointers, one to a good gameplay object, one to an evil gameplay object. And when the user turns evil on or off, I just with an if condition or a switch decide which of these objects to talk to. But what else could I do that's probably a little cleaner? Because this doesn't scale all that well, right? If we introduce a foo method, a foo model, a bar model, and a baz model, it's going to it's going to be copy-paste.
You can put ID and then gameplay delegate angle brackets as the type.
Yeah, so why don't I try to genericize this so that I just have one pointer, and at any point in the program, it only points to the gameplay type that I'm using. So I'll call this delegate, and it actually has to be a gameplay delegate, although it's not, I can't do this, delegate. I can't do this because this is not a what? It's not a class, so I can't declare it like that. So what I really need to say is, I actually want an ID pointer that implements the gameplay delegate protocol, and I'm just going to generically call it delegate. So now if this is the property in my main view controller class, I can, anytime the user clicks the new button or anytime the gameplay starts, I can allocate one of two objects. Either one, and let me do ... either one, I can do self.delegate gets, let's say, good gameplay alloc init, and I'll do this more literally, if evil is off, 1, 2, 3, 4, I can do this, and now I'll go up here, else self.delegate gets evil gameplay. So in other words, this way, I can very generically have in memory at any given point in time only one pointer to the gameplay object, the model, so to speak. So we're back, and the question at hand is, in the words.plist, suppose that there weren't words of length 4 or 5, but nonetheless we have a slider that is allowing me to configure the length of the words we want to support. How do we actually blacklist potentially these holes in the data set? So one, it's relatively easy to figure out what those holes are, right? You can iterate over all of the words in words.plist and have some kind of array that just or some kind of mechanism that keeps track of, I've seen 1-letter words, 2-letter words. It could be just an array of Booleans, frankly. So you can figure that information out pretty easily. But as for the slider, a slider is, if you've played with it yet, it is a floating point value. It has a couple properties, min value, max value, and its actual value. And when you drag and drop it with your finger, you can set it to 0.0, you can set it to 26.0, or something like that. So you're going to have to implement this with arithmetic, not with any built-in functionality of the slider. So what I do, for instance, in the staff's implementation, which isn't publicly available, we only played with it a week or two ago, what I do is I keep an array around that keeps track of, well, how many word lengths actually exist. Ideally, it's 26, and then everything's nice and simple. But damn, if it's 25, that means I kind of have to repartition the width. So what I actually do is, as you slide the slider and you reach 4.0, 4.0 doesn't necessarily mean words of length 4.0. It means the fourth possible length that I determined to exist when I analyzed the whole array of words in the universe. Now, if this is a bit mind-bending, you don't actually have to deal with this in the spec, because we don't expect that you deal with this. But if you want to, it's actually a really good exercise of ensuring that you can plug in an arbitrary words.plist file, and things will not break on you. And if that's a little abstract, let me not elaborate, because it's actually a really interesting design opportunity there. But you have to do that mapping yourself of a floating point value to an available spectrum of word lengths. Other design questions or comments? All right, so the best advice, honestly, we can give you is start tonight, because it's a lot of fun if you don't have the pressure of a Monday night or Tuesday night, Tuesday afternoon looming over you. So why don't we officially adjourn here? I'll stick around for one-on-one questions. Otherwise, do attend this week's section, and we'll see you next week.